Hey everyone, welcome to the Drow Sips. Tonight we're settling into the calm world of Silksong while moving through some of the most thought-provoking Reddit stories, all meant to help you drift off. Soft voice, dim lights, stories that invite reflection, not adrenaline. So let's start with a tale that unfolds in an unlikely place for romance. Picture someone dropping to one knee between the bench press and the squat rack. That's the start of this one. Not candlelight, not a quiet dinner, just the sound of weights clanking and people wiping down machines. The guy thought it was meaningful since he and his partner first met at that gym. But when he popped the question, her reaction wasn't joy. It was visible disappointment.
She forced a smile, but it didn't hide the letdown.
And honestly, it made sense. The gym's fluorescent lights and wandering eyes don't set a romantic tone. The friend watching all this, let's call him OP, noticed that unease. Later, when he quietly admitted, "I understand why she's not thrilled," it set off a bigger problem. His buddy felt attacked, like OP was taking the fiancé's side against him. In the buddy's mind, he had chosen a place full of meaning, and that should have been enough. But meaning isn't one-sided. For her, the public proposal felt like a spectacle instead of something personal. Once she admitted she'd hoped for someplace private, like a walk outdoors or a favorite restaurant, the disagreement deepened. Instead of listening, the friend doubled down, defending his own idea of romance. From there, things unraveled. The couple stalled on wedding plans. The fiancé wondered if he'd ignore her input on bigger life choices too. Meanwhile, the friendship frayed because OP had voiced what she couldn't say at first, that a proposal can still feel thoughtless if it doesn't reflect both people. To many observers, that was the real issue. It read as a misstep because the moment wasn't designed for her. That's why so many people looking in landed on the same lesson. Don't ask for opinions if you're not ready to hear the hard truth. The buddy wanted validation, but instead, the honest response stung. The details don't need dragging out. 3 beats sum it up. The proposal setting, the fiancé's letdown, and the friend lashing out when someone understood her feelings. It was all avoidable with one conversation beforehand. A simple, "Hey, what would your dream proposal look like?" Instead, the silence let assumptions pile up until the whole thing collapsed. Sometimes the fallout isn't about the big action itself, but how people respond once emotions spill out. And as you'll see next, there are times when keeping something bottled up for years can weigh even heavier than speaking up in the moment. Sometimes the posts that stand out the most aren't about conflict at all, but about relief. This one came from someone who had carried a heavy fight with their own health for years, and finally, they just needed to tell someone. They were cancer-free. The journey wasn't quick. It began with symptoms that didn't seem serious until tests confirmed the worst, cancer, followed by rounds of treatment that drained their body and spirit. Surgery after surgery, weeks of chemotherapy, complications that left them questioning whether their strength would hold up. In a single post, the OP described the constant exhaustion, the fear, and the way everyday life became a rhythm of waiting rooms and medications. They admitted there were moments of despair, when they wondered if all the pain was for nothing. But then came the message that made the entire community pause. Remission. After everything, the chemo cycles, the long hospital stays, the setbacks, the scans were clear. The cancer was gone. OP said they almost didn't believe the words when the doctor told them. They described sitting there stunned while the relief trickled in, like their body didn't know how to process the absence of fear it had been carrying all this time. There was joy in the details, the way food suddenly tasted better, how walking outside felt like breathing for the first time again, how laughter wasn't forced anymore. You could hear the tension lifting right off the page. Instead of a request for advice or comfort, this post was an exhale, typed out simply because silence felt too small to hold it. And in the replies, the community showed up the way Reddit sometimes genuinely does. Commenters celebrated with them. Some congratulated with nothing more than joy. Others shared their own remission dates, like milestones on a hidden calendar only survivors know. A few gave gentle reminders to take time to celebrate, because surviving something so enormous deserves more than quietly moving on like nothing happened. That collective response mattered. It gave the poster what family and friends sometimes can't. A space to say the words out loud and be met with cheers instead of quick nods. Strangers typed out, "I'm proud of you," to someone they'd never meet. And yet those 3 words carried a weight of understanding only people who faced that fight could offer. No, remission isn't a guarantee for life, but it is a door opening again, when for so long it felt welded shut. That's what made this post so powerful. It wasn't just about survival. It was about being able to look forward again. Not every discovery brings joy, though. Sometimes what you stumble across on an ordinary day can shake you with confusion and fear, especially when it comes from someone you love most. She was tidying the garage when a folded sheet of paper slipped out from behind a toolbox. At first she thought it was just an old receipt, but the handwriting was her husband's, and the words on the page froze her completely. "By the time you read this, I'll already be gone." The date in the corner showed it had been written about 3 months earlier. The note wasn't filled with anger. It read almost gently, the kind of goodbye you'd never want to imagine from someone you love. Line after line was full of apologies. He wrote that he'd failed as a partner, that he could never live up to her or anyone else's expectations. And it closed simply with, "I love you. I'm sorry." She sat there in the garage, staring at the paper, trying to process what it meant. Was this a suicide note he'd abandoned? A plan he'd never followed through on? And if so, how close had she come to losing him without even knowing? His shoes were still lined up by the door, his routines all intact. But this secret letter made the normalcy of their home feel unstable. When she brought it up, his reaction wasn't defensive. It wasn't even denial. He looked embarrassed. Not like someone caught doing something wrong, but like someone ashamed of being found out. He admitted he'd been at a breaking point that week, worn down and convinced she'd be better off without him. He said he'd written the letter, cried over it, and then let it sit. By the end of that week, the darkness had lifted just enough for him to decide to keep going. He'd meant to throw it away, but forgot. For her, the relief came first. Relief that he was alive, that this had been past tense and not current. But quickly it gave way to anger and fear. Why hadn't he told her? How had he hidden such a huge weight while she went about her days assuming everything was fine? She kept replaying the "I'm fine" responses he'd given her, and each one now sounded brittle in hindsight. What the people reading her post reminded her, and she clung to this, was that talking about it usually helps, not hurts. Asking him directly, checking in sincerely, and encouraging professional support are the right moves. Crisis lines and therapists alike advise that compassionate, clear questions don't push people closer, they tend to bring them back. That correction stuck with her. Silence creates distance, while words open a path. Ironically, the note did what the two of them had been dancing around for years. It forced them to have the kinds of conversations they kept avoiding. He admitted how small and inadequate he often felt. She admitted how blind she'd been to his pain. Between tears and apologies, they started drawing a map. Not out of romance, but out of survival. And when you think about it, whether it's life or death matters or something as simple as respecting a request, the through line is always the same: boundaries. The next post kicks off with a birthday dinner where one request was made crystal clear in advance. No filming. Not of the toast, not of gifts, and especially not of OP's face. Just a simple evening without a phone lens hanging over it. But if you've got a relative who lives behind a screen, you know how that goes. The sister-in-law was known for it. Every gathering, every holiday, always recording, rarely asking. OP was willing to let it slide before, but this night she'd asked for the boundary up front. And sure enough, halfway through appetizers, she caught the red recording dot, pointed right at her.
That was the breaking point. OP leaned in and calmly covered the lens with her hand. No grabbing, no shouting, just a quiet gesture to say, stop. The table went silent as the Sil yanked the phone back and accused OP of being controlling and dramatic. To her, it was harmless memory keeping. She swore she wasn't posting it anywhere, just saving clips. But here's what matters. Consent isn't about intention, it's about choice. OP didn't need footage of herself mid-bite or slouched in a chair locked permanently into a relative's phone gallery. Saying no ahead of time should have been enough. A dinner table is not a public park where you accept being in the background. It's a private place where everyone has a say in how they're seen. The reactions split.
Older relatives dismissed it as just pictures. They wanted the peace kept and thought OP had overreacted. The younger ones understood right away. They'd grown up on camera, logged into feeds, framed without asking, and they knew how heavy that could feel. It's one thing when memories are shared. It's different when someone else decides your boundaries don't count.
The SIL escalated,
saying she might as well leave if she couldn't record. She picked up her bag, waiting to be begged to stay. No one said a word. Even her husband just kept eating, and that silence said more than any defense could. For the first time, it seemed the family saw that her need to record wasn't about memory at all. It was about control.
In the weeks that followed, the tension lingered.
The SIL kept her phone put away, but with an exaggerated sigh every time something worth filming happened. OP held firm anyway, because once you set a line, the test comes right after, and if someone keeps ignoring it, you're allowed to attach consequences. Like saying, if you don't honor this rule in my space, you won't be invited next time. And as much as that struggle played out at a dinner table, the next story revolves around a living space itself. What it means when someone asks you to step out of your own home for their comfort.
The text came in at 7:32 a.m. on a Saturday.
Any chance you could stay somewhere else next Thursday? My mom's visiting OP stared at her phone, waiting for the rest of the explanation. When she pressed, her Muslim roommate finally admitted that her conservative mother wouldn't approve of them sharing an apartment. Not because of a fight, just because OP was a woman living with a man who wasn't family.
Requests like that are tricky because they're wrapped in politeness.
The roommate wasn't demanding, she framed it as just one small favor, to avoid conflict. She even offered to put money toward a hotel. But the principle stuck. This wasn't a guest space. OP was on the lease, paid her share of rent, filled the fridge. Being asked to leave her own apartment, even for a day, felt like being treated as temporary in a home she helped build.
Cultural context mattered.
OP understood why her roommate was anxious. Family approval and respect can carry heavy weight, especially across cultural or religious differences. At the same time, culture doesn't erase tenant rights. A home is still a sanctuary, and no one wants to feel like they need to vanish from their own life.
So OP offered compromises.
She suggested she could stay in her room most of the day, keep quiet, and have meals delivered privately to the door, if that helped avoid awkwardness. She wasn't trying to disrespect her roommate's mother, she simply didn't want to be displaced. A lot of commenters later pointed out a broader compromise too. If privacy really matters for a visit, it makes more sense for the roommate to cover a nearby hotel for herself and her mother. That way, they'd both get comfort without pushing OP out.
When the day came, the roommate chose not to push anymore and let things play out.
The mother arrived with a plate of baklava, her smile quick to fade when she noticed OP. The tension was immediate, not hostile, but sharp. OP stayed steady, moving through her usual routines. She folded laundry in the living room, studied at the kitchen table, even brought the mother a sweater when she complained of being cold. Those small acts weren't about winning her over, just about showing, I live here too, respectfully.
Later, after the visit, the roommate admitted she'd asked the wrong thing of OP.
She knew she hadn't meant harm, but she realized she'd tried to solve the problem by shifting the burden. Cultural sensitivity matters, but it shouldn't mean forcing someone else out of their own shelter.
Next time, the compromise was clear.
The mother booked a hotel nearby, framed as easier for errands and shopping. Everyone kept their dignity. The roommate kept family peace, and OP kept the sense of stability you need from home.
Sometimes the hardest part isn't standing your ground in the moment.
It's what settles in afterward. The weight of knowing you might have done right, but still carry someone's unease in silence.
Sometimes what lands in your lap is bigger than boundaries or house rules.
It's someone's final request. This story comes from a bystander who witnessed a motorcycle crash on a quiet road and ended up carrying a man's last words.
The man had been thrown from his bike.
A few people rushed in to help. OP knelt close, trying to keep him calm, holding steady as the sirens echoed somewhere far off. His breaths came shallow, broken around the pain. And then he locked eyes with OP and whispered, "Please, tell my wife I love her." That was it. Not a confession, not an explanation. Just a single sentence he needed carried forward.
OP stayed with him until the very end, repeating back, "I'll tell her."
In situations like that, words can feel like rope holding someone steady. Seconds after, the man was still. By the time EMTs arrived on scene, there was nothing left to do.
The days after were heavy.
OP felt the weight of that sentence, like a stone in the chest. They kept hearing his voice, replaying how urgent it had been, how certain. The question became unavoidable. What do you do when a stranger gives you something so personal? Is it your place to track down a widow you've never met and show up with words that may either comfort or devastate?
In the end, OP couldn't stomach the thought of silence. They reached out, found contact information, and delivered the message face to face. The conversation was simple. No details of the crash, no drawn-out scene setting. Just the words the man had said, handed over as faithfully as possible.
The widow's reaction was layered. First, disbelief. How could a stranger stand there with something so intimate? Then tears, and a soft thank you. What hit hardest for her was knowing his final thought wasn't fear or pain, but love, spoken clearly enough that a passerby could carry it home.
OP left unsure whether they'd helped or hurt. But weeks later, a card arrived in the mail. It was short, a thank you for being there when she couldn't, for making sure she heard what mattered most. That single note was enough to remind OP the errand had been worth every shred of doubt.
Still, trauma lingers. Being there in those final moments, holding that gaze, doesn't leave quickly. Many commenters urged OP to seek counseling, to talk it out instead of letting it gnaw silently inside. Carrying a gift doesn't mean you don't also carry the scars. Both can be true.
And if that last request showed the comfort found in small, ordinary truths,
the next one spirals around a very different kind of coping. Something that doesn't land as softly when it starts invading the shared air of home. The next story comes from someone trying to balance compassion with comfort inside their own home. Am I the day for banning my wife's Disney divorce friends' plugins from our house?
The Disney obsession itself wasn't new. Even before the divorce, the friend collected pins, had a Cinderella tattoo, and vacationed at the parks more often than most people go grocery shopping. Back then, it was quirky fandom, but after her marriage ended, it shifted into something heavier, a coping ritual that spilled over into other people's spaces.
She started showing up with Disney-themed plug-in air fresheners every time she visited. First, it was one cotton candy-scented Fantasia plug-in in the guest bathroom. Then another. Before long, the living room was drenched in fake pineapple from a Jungle Cruise pack, while the hallway smelled like chemical poppies from Winnie the Pooh. By the 6th visit, the whole apartment felt like someone had sprayed Epcot down with carnival sugar and synthetic perfume. Let's call him the husband. Tried to ignore it. He knew she was hurting. But when he discovered a Little Mermaid plug-in leaking ocean breeze that smelled like fishy soap into their bedroom, he hit the limit. He unplugged them all, set them on the counter, and told his wife flatly, "These can't come back."
For the friend, it landed like a gut punch. She cried, said he was being cruel, and insisted the scents gave her comfort when everything else felt empty. His wife looked caught in the crossfire, torn between protecting her friend's feelings and agreeing that their home was becoming unbearable.
Here's something that came up in the thread. It wasn't just about preference. Several commenters pointed out how artificial fragrances can trigger real reactions, headaches, allergies, even asthma. That fact changed the framing. It wasn't only about taste. It was about health and comfort in your own household. The husband wasn't unsympathetic. He offered another path. He suggested changing the HVAC filter, running the fans for clean air, and asking her to leave the plug-ins at home. He even rehearsed a calmer version of the boundary. "I'm so sorry you're hurting, and I want to help, but I can't have those scents here." A direct, kind statement, firm for the house, gentle to the guest. Boundaries held. His wife stepped in too, drawing the line between support and surrender. The friend was free to build her Disney sanctuary in her own apartment, but not to impose it through scented oil in theirs. After that, the friend visited less often, not in anger, but because the place no longer reflected her fantasy. Once the fragrances were gone, the home reverted to normal, sometimes smelling like coffee, sometimes like leftovers, but always real. And while this one was about drawing lines with a guest, the next turns inward. What happens when the tension doesn't come from outside the home, but from inside your own head? The man in this story confessed he barely recognized himself anymore. It started with little flickers of irritation, his wife leaving the baby wipes open so they dried out, or forgetting to restock the diaper caddy. At first, he brushed it off, but soon those flickers sharpened into contempt. Watching her struggle to latch their newborn, he'd think, why is this so hard for her? Even though he knew he couldn't do it any better. She'd fold a onesie inside out, and it felt like she'd failed some invisible test. Sleep debt feeds that kind of mindset. He understood newborn exhaustion turns anyone into a zombie, but awareness didn't stop the slope he was sliding down. He started mentally scoring her mistakes. Socks left behind the TV, bottles warmed too long, burp cloths forgotten on the couch, and the whisper in the back of his mind grew louder. She's not good at this. The breaking point wasn't even dramatic, a lost pacifier. She had set it down somewhere, couldn't remember where, and he snapped. He called her careless, filling the word with anger. The way her face fell burned into his memory, worse than any sleepless night. In that instant, he knew he was turning into someone cruel. A close friend pointed out something he hadn't considered. Postpartum depression isn't only a mother's battle. Men can develop their own version. Less tears, more anger. Stress, sleep loss, and pressure twist into impatience and contempt. That realization sent him to therapy, though he expected shame. Instead, his therapist explained how normal it is for new parents of any gender to experience mood changes under strain. Therapy and structured sleep plans are reliable first steps back towards stability. And that structure mattered. He tracked his patterns and noticed it was always worse at 3 a.m. after more than a day without rest. Naming those triggers gave him just enough space to act differently. Instead of spiraling unchecked, he could see the storm forming. The apology to his wife was plain but honest. No big speech, no flowers, just, I've been an asshole and I'm working on it. Direct, no excuses. She cried, not out of anger but in relief, admitting she'd been drowning in her own self-doubt too. That was the core truth of early parenthood. Both partners often feel like failures while assuming the other one has it together. From there, they carved out rules.
If one snapped, the other could quietly say sleeped at and tag them out. Earplugs and quiet shifts became more valuable than gifts. Over time, the thoughts didn't vanish, but they softened, because contempt can't thrive in daylight honesty. Owning it together changed the mood in their house.
And if that one was about catching yourself before resentment takes over, the next circles around a conflict where family expectations crash into a wedding plan already set in stone. The setup here starts with a wedding venue, a secluded garden estate booked more than a year in advance. The daughter had toured half a dozen places before landing on it, put down nearly $20,000 in non-refundable deposits, mailed save the dates, and lined up vendors. Then, 4 weeks before the ceremony, news landed hard. Her uncle had taken his 22-year-old mistress there and proposed. Same venue, same weekend that her invitations had been stamped and sent. For her aunt, the uncle's wife, it was unbearable. She felt humiliated, imagining walking into that garden knowing the spot had just hosted her husband's betrayal. She begged OP to move the wedding. "How can I show my face there?" she said, certain that guests would remember only what he'd done. The request came from a real place of grief, but it collided with a mountain of logistics. The daughter refused. Not to twist the knife, but because changing now would mean throwing away tens of thousands of dollars and unraveling a year of planning. Finding another space on such short notice in peak wedding season was close to impossible. Changing vendors, layouts, and contracts for someone else's choices felt unfair. Her stance was blunt. His bad behavior shouldn't dictate my happiness. Her aunt framed it differently. To her, keeping the garden meant choosing decorations and fairy lights over family pain. "You're picking a party over my dignity," she accused. That hurt OP, because she knew this wasn't about callousness. It was about respecting boundaries. A wedding is one of the few times a family event belongs to the couple, not the wider circle of relatives. Relatives split in their reactions. Some sided with the aunt, saying compassion should outweigh convenience. Others pointed out a hard truth. Nobody can expect another person to dismantle their wedding over a cheater's choice of scenery. Many noted too that the uncle himself kept silent, letting the women wrestle over the fallout of his choices without stepping up. That silence revealed the deeper injustice. The cheating husband faced no consequences, while his wife and his niece clashed. Pain has a way of making people aim their anger sideways, at whoever's standing nearby. But grief, however valid, doesn't create veto power over someone else's milestone. Ultimately, the wedding went forward. The aunt boycotted. Guests noticed at first, then moved on once the night unfolded under lights and music. Months later, the aunt admitted her absence left her more regret than relief. The venue wasn't the problem. The problem was her husband's betrayal, and how its echoes spread. And here's where the commenters landed. Both sides had truth on their side. The aunt's hurt was real. The daughter's decision was fair. But ultimately, a wedding reflects the couple's choice. Grief is real, but can't always rebook a life. And in the same way, not every clash is about betrayal. Sometimes it's about the weight of traditions and what happens when new relationships ask you to set them aside. The backyard party question came from someone asking, "Am I the tud for not changing my annual plans for my boyfriend and his kids?" This wasn't some random get-together. It was a 5-year tradition. Same weekend every summer. Same backyard, same mix of food, drinks, and games. Up marinated skewers days in advance, filled coolers, and set up cornhole boards on the lawn. Friends circled the date on their calendars. Then, days before the event, her boyfriend asked her to cancel. His kids were staying over for the first time since his divorce, and he didn't want them around adults drinking or loud music. OP was willing to bend. She offered to cut the music by 10, drop the jello shots, even keep things lighter than usual. But canceling outright? She couldn't do it. This party was part of her life before the relationship, and she wanted to keep it. That's when the tone shifted. He told her it meant she didn't prioritize him or his kids. He framed it as if she'd failed a test of loyalty. What cut deepest wasn't the ask. It was the sense that it wasn't just about one night. It was about whether her own life could exist alongside his.
Commenters later called this out as a red flag, and OP herself started to see it. When someone quickly expects you to scrap your own commitments in favor of their schedule, it can signal deeper control issues. Compromise is possible. Unilateral surrender isn't. If someone demands you reshape your life early in a relationship, pay attention. Just to complicate things more, the ex-wife texted OP directly. She echoed the boyfriend, saying kids should come first, implying canceling was the only respectful choice. The irony? She'd divorced him for being controlling, yet she was co-signing control over OP's space too. The party still went ahead. OP swapped out some of the heavier food for kid-friendly snacks, mixed up craft sodas along with beer, and kept the energy easygoing. Friends noticed the empty seats though. The boyfriend and his kids never showed. The gap was obvious. OP plastered on a smile, but she could feel the questions in every glance. And here's the part no one said out loud. There were so many middle options. He could have taken the kids out for ice cream until the party mellowed out. He could have introduced them to OP's friends' older kids, who weren't out of control. He could have let them stay with his parents for the night. He chose all or nothing instead. Afterward, things never found balance again. Every girls' night out became ammunition in his arguments. Every time she prioritized her work or her own plans, he held it against her. He admitted later over coffee that he hoped she'd step into a stepmom role from the start, adjusting everything around him. She wanted a partner, not a parent role assignment. Neither one was wrong. They were just different blueprints. If it feels like a control test, you don't have to pass it. And speaking of control, the next story drops us into a family barbecue, where someone decided to point the finger at the wrong person. It happened over burgers and corn on the grill. The cousin wrinkled her nose in front of everyone, waved a hand dramatically and said, "Somebody smells awful in here." Her eyes landed just a little too long on OP. The meaning was clear. She wanted the family to think it was her, but OP knew different. She'd hugged her cousin earlier and caught the sharp edge of body odor clinging to her blouse. She'd kept quiet then out of politeness. This time was different, so she spoke up. Calm but firm, she said, "If you're going to point fingers, at least be honest." The patio froze. Aunts stopped mid-conversation. Kids set down their plates. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. In seconds, the cousin's cheeks blasted red as she sputtered denials. She tried to laugh it off, claimed she didn't know what OP was talking about. But her crossed arms, the sweat lining her shirt, and the way she'd been fanning herself all afternoon told the story. Everyone else could see it too. Her mom rushed in to smooth things over, scolding OP for being harsh. But OP didn't back down. She wasn't about to let herself become the scapegoat for someone else's discomfort. She'd even worn natural deodorant explicitly because, in the past, her cousin often asked to borrow some. That made the accusation sting more. It wasn't the cousin's first time dodging blame. The family knew the pattern. Years ago, she blamed a broken vase on the dog that wasn't even inside. At a cousin's graduation, she'd accused the valedictorian of cheating after losing the speech contest. Deflection had become her armor, and this time she aimed it at OP. The fallout was fast. The cousin stormed off to the bathroom and slammed the door. The rest of the family muttered about drama, then moved on with plates of potato salad and ribs. But later, when the evening had cooled down, the cousin found OP quietly and offered a small apology. She admitted she'd been embarrassed about sweating through her clothes. She'd panicked, blurted something reckless, and tried to drag someone else into it. That admission changed the tone. This wasn't really about smell, it was about shame. Saying, "Whoops, forgot deodorant today," could have been shrugged off. Instead, she threw another person under the bus. OP accepted the apology, but left her with one clear line. Next time, just be honest.
The online community echoed the same verdict. They said OP was not the asshole. They called the cousin's move exactly what it was, deflection. And that was the real lesson here. Deflection might buy you a minute of relief, but over time, it chips away at trust. And just as honesty can ease tension in small, awkward moments, it becomes even more complicated when bigger boundaries collide in family events, like whether certain rules apply on one of the most carefully planned days of your life. The next dilemma came from a bride-to-be who asked, "Am I the for not wanting a service dog to be part of my wedding?" Her invitations included a short line at the bottom. "Due to venue restrictions and guest allergies, no pets at the ceremony." It seemed clear until her fiancé's cousin reached out. She explained that she had a trained medical service dog, not a casual support animal, but a golden retriever that alerted for seizures. In her life, the animal wasn't a pet, it was medical equipment. The bride's stomach dropped. Suddenly, a small detail on an invitation became the biggest problem on the guest list. The wedding venue was an old chapel with tight pews, antique flooring, and no extra space. Add to that, the florist had a serious dog allergy. The bride wanted to be fair, but she had also dreamed of walking down the aisle without worrying about a leash sneaking into her train, or someone sneezing through family photos. She tried to offer compromises. Could the cousin sit in the aisle seat with the dog just off to the side? Could a handler stand a few feet away near the exit, within sight in case of an alert? Could the dog skip staged photos to avoid allergy flare-ups? According to comments in the original thread, these kinds of arrangements are common. Placing the dog near the front row with a handler, close enough to help but not disrupting key moments. The cousin held firm. The dog had to stay 3 feet from her at all times. No exceptions. That was when emotions escalated. Some relatives framed it immediately as discrimination, saying she was shutting out accessibility. Others reminded her that service animals are indeed essential medical companions, but private venues do have discretion to balance health, safety, and property concerns. The most thoughtful advice online leaned neutral. Talk to the cousin, the venue staff, and the photographer together. If the dog's clinical needs required constant contact, then prioritize safety and make space. If not, a quiet compromise, like the dog remaining close by but outside formal frames and out of the tightest aisles, could work for everyone. The part that weighed most on the bride wasn't the logistics, though. It was how quickly her reluctance was painted as cruelty. She wasn't dismissing medical need, she was trying to navigate between one person's lifeline and another person's health. Family group chats flared up with accusations about her being ableist. She worried she was losing control of her own wedding to a debate where her concerns didn't seem to count at all.
In the end, she agreed to allow the dog. It barked once during the start of the ceremony, which drew laughs. The florist took antihistamines and quietly endured symptoms. The cousin stayed close to her golden retriever the whole night, the leash brushing against chairs. The bride held her vows together, but couldn't shake the frustration of feeling unheard. Looking back, she said what hurt most wasn't making room for the dog. It was the absence of empathy for how hard the balancing act had been. Creating true inclusion means making space for both accessibility and the practical boundaries of others. It's messy and human, and it's how fairness usually looks in real life. Sometimes the weight you feel isn't about clashing needs, but about surviving something that others couldn't, and realizing even family doesn't always know how to hold that with you.
The crash divided two lives that had once run side by side. A brother and sister on an ordinary mall trip, caught in a chain of twisted metal and sirens. She walked away bruised. He left in a chair, his spine forever changed. At first, relatives spoke of them as a pair, the accident victims, but time dragged them apart. She went back to school, began dating, landed a job. He cycled through rehab and endless therapy sessions. The line between them widened when her milestones stacked up against his struggles. At her graduation, their parents beamed, while he muttered under his breath about her shoes in the hallway. Must be nice having feet that work. The bitterness showed in fragments. Not shouting,
but small cuts buried in casual remarks.
You're lucky you can wear heels. Or, easy for you, you don't look broken. Each jab stung more because she heard the pain underneath and didn't know how to answer.
She tried. She invited him to movies he refused, sent links about adaptive sports, asked to join him at therapy only to be met with, "I don't need your pity." He shielded himself with anger, but it was also avoidance. His resentment lived like static in every room they shared. Gatherings turned tense. When family praised her apartment, he went silent. When she mentioned a hiking trip, he knocked over her glass, staining the tablecloth with something louder than words. After their mother's birthday, she finally asked him outright, "Do you hate me for surviving?" His sponge went still in the sink. The answer came low. "Sometimes." The weight wasn't in rage, but in the quiet honesty. He admitted he couldn't stop comparing, that seeing her reminded him of what he'd lost. It wasn't truly hate, it was grief curdled into spite. For her, it still hurt like hate. Therapists call that survivor's guilt, but it doesn't belong to the survivor alone. Sometimes it flips back onto the one left injured, who projects their grief onto the person who walked away whole. That doesn't make his words okay. Hearing them carved her, yet understanding the root helped her reframe them. His hurt was real, but so was the damage those barbs left behind. Since then, she's adjusted. She texts him instead of calling, leaving space for him to answer on calm days. He's stopped with the sharpest comments. A fragile truce built on small steps. More than once, she's thought of asking him to join family counseling, something neutral, guided, where both could admit truths without one carrying the whole weight. Even if he refuses, reminding him gently that she doesn't blame him, and that therapy could offer ease, is one way of softening the ground between them. There's no clean end to stories like this. Just two people standing on opposite banks of the same river, trying to call across when the water isn't too loud. And it leads into another situation where intentions were meant as kindness, but what people saw, or thought they saw, turned it into something far more complicated. She never thought making dinner for a coworker's family would follow her like this. His wife was out of town for a week, and he had 2 kids under 12 bouncing off the walls. So she showed up one evening with lasagna trays, even set the oldest kid up to help stir sauce, just for fun. Later, she posted a couple pictures of the meal. Nothing flashy, just helped a friend survive dinner with 2 hungry kids. When the wife got back, everything changed. By Friday, OP's phone buzzed with a message that made her stomach drop. "I know what's going on between you two." No preface, no explanation, just accusation. She'd checked his phone, seen their work banter, memes, light chatter about the boss, and paired that with the dinner night. In her mind, OP wasn't being a helpful coworker, she was playing house. OP tried to explain. She'd dropped off the meal, left before bedtime, even used disposable pans so there'd be no cleanup. But once suspicion takes root, details don't matter. Suddenly, every moment, bringing him coffee at his desk, giving his daughter a ride home from soccer, was reinterpreted as proof. What stung most was how he responded. He didn't own the situation. He told OP, "She's just been stressed. She misread things." As though this was about her being too sensitive, not about his failure to set boundaries. That's when OP realized he may have vented about their marriage to her before. Offhand remarks about being tired of chores or missing date nights. Small confessions in the moment, but gasoline when they were replayed through his wife's eyes. For weeks, she second-guessed herself. That time she teased him about his ugly sweater, the tie adjustment before a client pitch. Little bits she'd shrugged off as normal at work now felt suspicious. But stepping back, she saw the core problem. The husband never told his wife outright
If you're helping a colleague's family while their partner's away, you loop the partner in first. Clear communication could have stopped the whole wildfire before it started.
So OP changed how she moved at the office. No more lunches with him at her desk. No more casual handoffs.
She routed things through other coworkers. Happy hours she once looked forward to, she skipped. It wasn't worth the risk of misinterpretation. And in the background, she started feeling uncomfortable in her own skin, wondering how others viewed her good intentions. Months later, the wife half apologized. She'd uncovered actual messages from someone else, another woman in his life, and realized she'd projected onto OP. That cleared the air a little, but things never went back to normal. Once trust cracks, it doesn't really seal again.
The bigger lesson here is optics matter. Acts of kindness can be twisted without context. If you step into a role that affects someone else's family, make it fully transparent. Protect your reputation before assumptions do damage.
Now, let's move to another thread, where instead of suspicion, the shift came home in a single sentence. A lifelong partner admitting he was leaving. The update begins with a moment she never thought she'd face. Her husband admitted he was leaving her for someone younger. And instead of breaking down, her eyes settled on the house around her. The colorless walls, the sterile furniture, the way the place looked more like a showroom than a home. It hit her harder than the words themselves. She didn't cry or argue. Instead, she went straight to the hardware store and came back with paint swatches. By the end of the week, the living room walls were bright where they'd once been muted. Pillows, curtains, even the artwork came down and were swapped with things that actually made her smile. For years, she had lived inside his preferences. Neutral colors, sparse decoration, nothing too loud. Now every brushstroke felt less like avoidance and more like a claim. This is mine.
Friends worried. They told her she was distracting herself, skipping over the grief. But for her, the act of painting, rearranging, and choosing for herself wasn't denial. It was the first time in years she truly felt present in her own space. While many people would grieve in silence, she was putting her feelings into color on the walls.
When her ex stopped by to collect some things, the reaction was almost funny. He froze in the doorway, taken aback that the dull walls were gone, that the furniture had been shifted, that the energy of the house no longer matched him. The younger girlfriend wrinkled her nose at the teal cabinets, whispering that it was all too loud. The wife just smiled to herself. She didn't need their approval. She even started posting small updates online, not to craft a revenge narrative, just to share what she was doing. Comments poured in. Strangers mailed her small house gifts, ceramic drawer pulls, a blanket embroidered with encouragement. That outside support mattered. It reminded her she wasn't alone, and that community can come from unexpected places. 6 months later, while clearing out a dusty corner, she found the whiskey bottle he had hidden away. Instead of saving it, she poured it out, refilled it with neon pink lemonade, and slid it back on the shelf. It was a small private joke, a reminder that the house no longer carried his shadow. Still, even as she reclaimed the space, commenters in her thread gave one sober reminder. Make sure you also handle the practical side. Keep records of contributions, speak to a lawyer, and protect your rights in the split. A bold new kitchen doesn't untangle legal matters, and healing means thinking about both. In the end, the decor was more than design. It was an act of erasure and rebuilding. She wasn't just brightening walls. She was painting out the version of herself who had lived quietly for someone else. And as we move ahead, the theme of boundaries returns. This time inside a young family where support turns into overstepping in ways that rattle a new mother's sense of safety. The sister had always had a habit of stepping where she wasn't invited. Before the baby, it looked like harmless meddling, showing up unannounced, rearranging kitchen cabinets, chiming in on relationship choices. But once the baby arrived, that behavior escalated. She began calling herself Mommy Number 2 without a hint of irony. She'd scoop the newborn up without asking, disappear into another room, and roll her eyes when asked to bring the baby back for feeding. "You're so anxious." "I raised 3 kids. I know what I'm doing," she'd say. It went beyond annoying. It was invasive. She dismissed every parenting choice the new mom made. If OP reached for disposable diapers, the sister clucked about cloth being the responsible way. If tummy time brought fussing, she snatched the baby up, saying, "Auntie knows you hate this." Boundaries were voiced. "Please ask before picking her up." "Don't give her water, the pediatrician said no." But they were ignored the moment OP's back was turned.
Things boiled over with an afternoon walk.
OP, bleary from 3 sleepless nights, asked if the sister could take the baby just around the block while she rested. The sister agreed. She strapped the baby into the stroller and left. 2 hours later, OP woke to silence. No stroller outside, no text, no call. Panic kicked in. Calls went straight to voicemail. She phoned her husband, searched the street, and finally dialed 911.
Police found the sister at a park nearly 40 minutes away.
She was furious, snapping that OP was overreacting. She argued it was tradition to bring kids to that playground and accused OP of being hysterical. To her, it was bonding. To OP, it was theft of time, trust, and safety. Then came the locked door moment, a bigger red flag. At one visit, the sister carried the baby into the nursery and shut the door behind her. When OP turned the handle, it didn't budge. Whether she had flipped the lock or not, the meaning landed. OP was cut out from her own child. That was the breaking point.
OP banned her. Family split into camps.
Some minimized it. She just loves the baby she was helping. Others scolded OP for calling the police earlier. But the husband was clear. This was about control, not care. A parent's word comes first. Commenters online offered both empathy and practical advice. Change the locks in case she'd made a copy. Install cameras or door sensors for peace of mind. Write down every incident with dates, times, and what was said, keeping a record in case boundaries were crossed again. Those steps gave OP more than outrage. They gave her a concrete plan for safety.
Since then, the sister has tried to soften her behavior. She asks before holding the baby and keeps her visits shorter. Still, trust, once cracked, can never be completely polished back. And that's a valid truth. Setting strict boundaries doesn't make you overprotective. It makes you a parent who listens to instinct. Family discomfort doesn't erase your right to keep your child safe. And with it, we close tonight's collection on a quiet note. Real lives, raw edges, and the small lessons they leave behind. That's where tonight's stories pause. Threads of family strains, quiet confessions, and choices that stick in the air long after they're spoken. Just like Silksong's tunnels, the paths twist and overlap. Never simple, always human. If there's one thing to carry with you, it's this. People are messy, and the kindest thing we can do is listen and set clear boundaries. That's how trust holds. Turn down your lights, find a soft pillow, and let this quiet company carry you into sleep. If this helped you unwind tonight, subscribe for more calm story time and cozy gameplay.